Okay, candidates, thank you for joining us. We're going to continue. And let me remind everybody of the ground rules for this program. And for the candidates who might not have heard this, you are seated in order determined by our by lot, I believe, random as far as I'm concerned. We are not going to have opening statements, and we won't be taking questions from the audience, but we have developed questions that are representative of the questions provided by the registrants, various bar associations, and the sponsoring bar associations. And we're asking each candidate, gentlemen, to limit your answers to 90 seconds, 1.5 minutes. Mr. Friedman here in the front row has a sign. When it flashes yellow, that means you have 15 seconds. When it flashes red, it means you're out of time. And at the end of the questions, there'll be an opportunity to provide a brief closing statement, and we're asking that you limit those to 90 seconds as well. We understand that some of you may have to leave early, in which case you will forfeit your closing statement. So let me start, and we'll start with Mr. Albanese and come down the row here. What, if anything, would you do in exercising your authority regarding the school system that differs from what the current administration has done?
Well, I'm the only teacher running for mayor. I taught for 11 years in the New York City public schools, so I understand education from the ground up. One of the things that I would immediately do is change the tone of the administration towards teachers. Teachers feel like they've been demonized over the last 4 years. I have 2 daughters that are teachers, and they come home and they tell me, "Dad, why does the mayor talk like that about us?" I think it's bad policy to demoralize the people who teach our youngsters. And I am for the teacher evaluation system that was just in place. I think it's a step in the right direction. But I would try and work collaboratively with all of the people in our educational community, teachers, parents, administrators. We all have a common goal, which is to improve our education system, which is not easy to turn around. There are things that we need to do to make sure that that happens. But I would also, I would keep mayoral control. I think it's important. I think accountability for the system is essential. But I would amend the the PEP, which is the educational panel, that would provide for fixed terms for the people who sit on that panel that the mayor appoints, so that we don't see what happened in the last couple of years where they disagree with the mayor, they were immediately removed. I want to provide for fixed terms to give them the ability to speak openly without being concerned about being fired, or they don't get paid anything, but that would be one of the things I would amend.
Thank you. Mr. Liu.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank the Bar Association and all the sponsoring organizations for bringing all of us together tonight. Thank you, ERROL, for once again moderating. The school system is obviously, it's our #1 responsibility in city government. The Department of Education takes up a full third of our municipal budget every single year, so it is by far our largest responsibility. And there are a number of things that I would like to change in the school system, but because we only get 90 seconds, I only get a chance to give you bullet points. Number 1, I would seriously reduce the emphasis, the overemphasis on testing in our schools, particularly high-stakes once-a-year exams that have led to all sorts of, I think, perverse results that we don't need in our schools. I'd also de-emphasize the emphasis and favoritism shown to charter schools within the city of New York. I think the deck has been stacked heavily in their favor at the expense of all the other schools in the city of New York. I also would, long ago, called for a moratorium on school closures and co-locations. I think we need to get back to the basics. All of these movements, closures, repopulating the school building with multiple schools, I think it's a shell game that doesn't actually enhance the educational value, doesn't provide more choice to parents and students. And overall, bottom line is, I would like to stop running our schools as if they are business divisions reporting up to a DOE corporation. We've got to restore the learning environment in each and every one of our schools. I'm proud to be a product of New York City Public Schools, kindergarten through 12th grade. So is my wife. Our son is halfway through. He's in the 7th grade. We have a tremendous amount of potential and promise in our public schools. We just have to run them better. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
First, let me start out by thanking the Bar Association and the other sponsoring organizations for bringing us together this evening. Errol, I'm starting to be really concerned. I'm spending more time with you than I am with my wife these days at this forum.
That's right.
Look, the Department of Education, and really, I think that, look, as a son of a former public school teacher and as the former president of the New York City Board of Education for 5 years, school system has been going in the wrong direction for years. The first thing, I think we need to have an educator as the chancellor again. We haven't had an educator in years. The last real educator was Rudy Crew. And I think it is really time that we went back to that again. Enough of the business people running the education system. I was the first person to call for a moratorium on school closings, and I support a moratorium on co-location right now. We need to stop the excessive number of school closings. You've seen 160 schools that have been closed under the Bloomberg administration in the last 10 years. We need to work to turn schools around, not turn our backs on schools, not close them so we can co-locate or so we can break them up into smaller schools. There are ways and procedures that you can use to turn schools around. When I was at the Board of Education, we had something called the Chancellor's District. We turned schools around. The Priorities Education Panel, the mayor has 8 out of the 13 people. I don't need a majority of that panel. Give me 6 out of 13. If I can't convince, or if the chancellor can't convince one person to join us in something that is sound educationally, it probably shouldn't happen anyway. Smaller class size and early grades. And last but not least, this excessive focus on standardized testing needs to stop. We need to focus on comprehension and critical thinking. We need to bring things back in the public school system like art and music education again. That creates well-rounded students.
Okay.
Errol, I'm sorry, when it's yellow and when it's red, what does that mean?
Yellow means 15 seconds.
Okay.
Red means what it means.
Shut up. All right, got it.
Gentlemen, the NYPD stop and frisk policies have generated a lot of press and clearly involve conflicting rights, obligations, and interests. What would you keep and what would you change about those policies? Let's start with Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, I've said repeatedly that stop and frisk, while a useful policing tool, has been misused and abused by this administration. Anytime when you have, wow, in 2011, 700,000 young people, or 700,000 people stopped, 90% of them Black and Latino. Last year, 550,000 who were stopped for no other reason than who they are, who they were, what they look like. There is something wrong. So stop and frisk, we need to focus on additional training. And let's be honest, the reason that you've seen this excessive increase in stop and frisk is because you've tied it to performance goals. You put the numbers attached to stop and frisk. That's not supposed to occur. So what has happened is people have been stopped needlessly all across the city of New York. Young people, you know, if you talk to so many of them, most of them, as I said, who are Black and Latino, they will tell you they've been stopped for no other reason than who they were. And it's been tied to numbers, to, there are some people who won't say quotas, but it's been tied to performance goals and performance indicators. That's wrong. It needs to stop. It needs to have a mayor and a police commissioner who say no, that we're not going to allow this to continue. That's one of the things that need to occur to be able to make sure that stop and frisk doesn't continue to be misused under any administration.
Mr. Liu.
I don't think stop and frisk works. I think at the end of the day, it makes people less safe. I think the division that it has engendered between communities and the police have gone so far to really erode or destroy trust between the police and the communities. It's making the police having a tougher time doing their job and therefore making everybody less safe. It also is a huge, huge misdirection of resources to stop that many people a year, almost all of whom have done nothing wrong. There are better strategies out there. Let's not fool ourselves or let anybody, the mayor or the commissioner, fool us into thinking that stop and frisk is the only option out there. There are other major American cities that have seen significant reductions in crime without resorting to widespread stop and frisk. I say we go back to community policing, focused deterrence, a strategy that has worked very well in other major cities where the police work hand in hand with community leaders, clergy leaders, and members of the public to identify the hot spots, the places that people avoid. People generally have a sense as to what they don't want to see in their community. If they are working hand in hand with the police, I think that's a far better use of resources, police resources, to really combat crime and drive the crime numbers down. Statistically, it doesn't hold up. There is no correlation between the number of murders going down and the number of stop and frisks. There's very little correlation between the guns being taken off the street and the numbers of stop and frisks. But beyond all of that, I have to say, look, I'm an immigrant. I was born in Taiwan. I've got this thing back here that says made in Taiwan. All right. When we read about stop and frisk, 700,000 people a year in New York City being stopped, almost all of whom have done nothing wrong. We sometimes think that we must be reading about some third world dictatorship, not somewhere in America, and certainly not here in New York City. So let's not think that this is the only option. There are other effective measures that will reduce crime and not humiliate hundreds of thousands of young men needlessly.
Thank you. Mr. Albanese.
We live in the United States of America. No one should be stopped in violation of the Constitution. The program has caused tension between the police and communities, and it should be amended. I want to focus on quality stops, not quantity. I do believe it is a deterrent to people carrying guns if it's appropriately applied. What I want to do is, number one, train the officers properly on the proper methodology for stopping someone. Reasonable suspicion, I'm a lawyer, you're all lawyers in the room, it's pretty complicated, and some of the, especially the young cops, they don't really get the training that they need. And I want in-service courses as well for all officers in the city to make sure that they really understand what the proper approach is. Number two, I want to hire 3,800 more officers because patrol strength has eroded, and patrol is the core of policing, and we need to build trust between the police and communities, and they're the front line, they interact, and we need to rebuild that trust. And thirdly, I think we have to reform our drug laws. Many of these stops for marijuana and lead to arrests, and it just doesn't make any sense. If we reform our drug laws, decriminalize marijuana, and I have advocated legalizing it, taxing it, and regulating it, that would go a long way towards reducing those stops and also many of these arrests. I mean, some of you have been in arraignments, and how many people are being arrested and being put through the system and criminalized for a long time because of marijuana arrests. It doesn't make any sense. That's my approach.
Thank you. We'll start with John Liu for the next question. In connection with the stop and frisk trial, the Bloomberg administration reportedly leaked a memo attacking Judge Shenlin's allegedly biased trial rulings. And similarly, the administration questioned before the Second Circuit the impartiality of Judge Garalfas in the trial concerning the New York City Fire Department's alleged discriminatory hiring practices. The question is, do you think the Bloomberg administration crossed the separation of powers line in those cases? And more generally, what is appropriate for the mayor to say and do regarding judicial decisions that the mayor might not like?
Well, I cannot profess to be a lawyer or a legal expert in terms of exactly where that line between confidentiality and spin is crossed. But look, I've been city controller for almost 3.5 years now, and we in the controller's office certainly feel that there are lots of leaks taking place whose purpose is to make our office look bad for whatever reason. Now, you know, this happens quite a bit, and I think this administration has developed a very clear expertise in terms of how to get information out to the press corps and to generate certain types of stories. I don't know exactly where that line is crossed, if it in fact has been crossed. But I certainly do believe in a far greater form of transparency at City Hall and not using the press all the time to maneuver or to generate stories towards a certain legislative or policy goal. That's legislative policy goals and decision-making for the public good should be done with the utmost of transparency and not through backhanded measures that use the press to generate these stories.
Mr. Albanese.
I would agree with John. I think that mayors have to be very careful about commenting on judicial decisions. I think that it could have you can be respectful and disagree with a judicial decision, but I think it's not good policy to beat up on the judiciary and leak information about them. It has a chilling effect on on decisions, and judges are also very sensitive to criticism. So we've seen too much of that over the years, where mayors just attack a judicial decision. So we've got to be careful about doing that, and I'm going to be very respectful about disagreeing with judges over cases that may be counter to the administration. So that's the way I see it.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
Well, as the son of a former judge, I've disagreed with judges, or at least with my father. Look, I think that it is appropriate for the mayor of the city of New York to be able to use the bully pulpit that that person has to be able to disagree with legal decisions. That's not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is an attempt to vilify and undermine the character and integrity of a justice. And I think, as a person who was on the other side of some of that while as controller, but definitely in the 2009 election, when I ran for mayor against Mike Bloomberg, attacks on integrity that are not true, unfounded, unnecessary, I just disagree. I think it is not the way that government should conduct itself. When you look at both Judge Scheinlein and also, Judge Garifas, I've known Judge Garifas for years. I would never question his integrity or his intentions. I think that you can disagree with a decision, but to disagree and try and undermine, vilify, and basically smear an individual is wrong. And to use government, to use your position, to have it leaked is wrong. So I think that we can disagree publicly. You can question and disagree with a decision, but to go out and attempt to undermine, vilify, and destroy someone's integrity is absolutely wrong. To attack their reputation because you disagree is wrong.
Thank you. We've been joined by candidate and public advocate Bill de Blasio, who says he heard the question and is eager to respond. You have 90 seconds. The timekeeper is in the front row.
Thank you very much, ERROL. It's one of the abilities of a mayoral candidate to hear the question from outside the room. It's a great skill. ERROL, thanks for moderating this, and to everyone for being here. Two parts to my answer. The first is, and I agree with Bill Thompson, the notion of a mayor of New York City in effect casting aspersions on the judiciary as a whole, because he casts aspersions on an individual judge who's asking the right questions about practices of the NYPD. That's exceedingly troubling. It's inappropriate, undermines confidence in the judiciary. I wrote an editorial op-ed in the Huffington Post a couple days ago on this, because I think this is part of a pattern with this administration of attacking critics who are raising valid issues and in trying to undermine the kind of debate we need to have. The revelations that have come out of the trial point out how much we have to appreciate what Judge Scheinlein has done. I think it's been a very sobering moment in the history of the city to hear the transcripts, to hear what it is like to have a police officer instructed to perform racial profiling, to hear that a quota system is fully in place that's actually undermining the relationship between police and community and making us less safe. The second quick related point, different candidates have different views. I think this is one of the areas where we really need, as New Yorkers, to understand the differences. I think we need a new police commissioner. I think we need a great reduction in stop and frisk. We need a racial profiling bill, and we need an inspector general. We need all of those things if we're going to really reform stop and frisk. And I think the mayor's tried to smokescreen the debate on this issue and obscure it, but those are the changes that would actually allow us to restore the faith between police and community and become a safer city for the long term.
Thank you. This is our lightning round. I'm going to ask some questions and ask you for a show of hands. Who thinks that religious groups should be allowed to conduct services in public schools on the weekends? Raise your hand if you think that's a good idea.
If they wait in line for the opportunity like any other nonprofit and they pay the same fee as any other nonprofit, yes.
Right.
Exactly.
It shouldn't be discriminated against just because they're a religious organization if other nonprofits can do so.
Who would continue the city's policy of refusing to settle the Central Park 5 case?
The Central Park 5 case needs to be settled.
Settled with payment. Settled with
Who
payment.
wants to settle?
Who wants to settle?
Yeah,
Yes.
because your question was who would continue.
Well, this is true. Yes, it's a double negative. Let's just clear it up. Who would like to settle the case?
Settle the case with a fair payment for the victims.
Okay. If elected, who would commit to not trying to extend his term as provided in the city charter?
Got that.
Okay.
Let me stand up on that.
Yes.
Who would commit to phasing out the use of carriage horses in New York City?
I didn't hear it.
I'm sorry, repeat that again?
Ready to, this is, raise your hand if you will phase out the use of carriage horses in New York City.
I favor the
Phased
Nislik
out.
plan. I favor the Steve Nislik plan. Go ahead.
Okay.
I favor an immediate ban.
And finally, if elected mayor, would you be for allowing the New York City Housing Authority to permit luxury development on tenant parks, parking lots, and playgrounds?
Not the Bloomberg
No.
plan.
Absolutely not.
No, no hands on that. Okay, good. Thank you. Let's get back to our questions.
Did you ask the Republicans the same question?
I did.
Oh, wait a second, and we'd love to know the
And on
answer.
time, you would have heard it.
We'll do it later.
Are you, let's, you're going to start the answers this time, Mr. de Blasio. Are you satisfied that the city's laws and procedures are adequate to address corruption and wrongdoing of public employees? And if not, what would you change?
Absolutely not satisfied. Look, we're doing better than Albany, New York, which that's right. That is not saying much at all. I've called for a series of changes. You know, just this year, the 4th city council member started down the road of the judicial process for a violation involving member items, discretionary funding. 3 have gone to jail. The 4th, Councilman Halloran's been indicted. It would be 4 city council members in 4 years who would have gone to jail because of member items. I think it's time for a full ban on member items as we know them. The same thing the federal and state government have done. Ban them. Use community participatory budgeting instead. So yes, community groups can get funding, but in a transparent, open way where community members are part of the process. I think we need a whole different kind of oversight at the City Council. The internal ethics mechanisms, the ethics committee is simply insufficient. We need an independent, either an inspector general or some other type of independent force at the City Council. We need to have lobbying disclosure become mandatory for all elected officials. My office, since I became advocate, we've put up anytime I meet with a lobbyist on anything related to their lobbying work, we put it online immediately. That should become the rule for every elected official in this city. And I think we need state legislation to greatly intensify the financial penalties related to corruption. We all know we have trouble reaching the pensions of existing elected officials because of the state constitution if they've done something wrong, but another way to get them is increased financial penalties, and that's the way we have to go.
Thank you. Mr. Albanese.
Well, obviously we have a broken political system. I mean, and people are very cynical about the process, and you could see that in voter turnout. So I think we have to do everything possible to reform it. I've called for a ban on member items back in 1996 when I was a legislator. I'm glad that Bill has just joined me this year. Thank you, Bill. That's a problematic form of corruption because, and you see in the where council members actually put relatives on the payroll and what have you, and we have to reform. We have a good campaign finance law in the city. We have to improve it. I'm not accepting money from lobbyists or developers in this campaign, and unfortunately, that's still allowed under the system. And we have to make sure that we have independent redistricting. There's gerrymandering going on. There are political appointees on that commission that draw the district lines, which basically protect incumbents. We need to do that as well. We have to restore confidence on the part of the people of the city, because everywhere I go, people are pretty cynical about many of our elected officials, and for good reason. We also have to reform the Board of Elections, and professionalize it, which causes people to stand online for hours to vote, and that's not by accident. That's unfortunately by design to diminish participation. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I have a record of doing it when I was a council member.
Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, it's clear. You know, the most disheartening thing is to be able to talk to community residents or young people who were thinking about going into public service. And they turn around and look and basically say, I don't want to be part of something like that. I don't want to be part of a system that's corrupt. And I think that, you know, the message that continues to get sent out for New York City and New York State is it says that, you know, it's acceptable in one form or another, because all too often, you know, we're just seeing elected official after elected official who has violated their trust, who's broken their commitment to the people and basically are there for themselves. I think that in a number of ways, it is making sure that those penalties are so severe that no one is going to think about going down that path. So it is, if you're an elected official and you've used your position incorrectly, illegally, you should lose your pension. You shouldn't be allowed to cash in and, you know, when you come out of jail, that pension is sitting there waiting for you. Let that be a thought. Let that, understand that you shouldn't have that right, because you have violated your trust with the people of this city and state. It's also in looking at the penalties. You're an elected official, you violate that trust, additional penalties should accrue. Because you were an elected official, you were in a position of public trust, and you violated that. The additional penalties should accrue. And last but not least, in disclosure, and to be honest about it, the forms in a lot of ways that are done as far as disclosure are very thorough. However, some of the things in organizations that receive money and their relationship to elected officials, there needs to be disclosure on that level also. That will start to create a situation of transparency, of openness, and then in the end, if you violate the law, you will go to jail. You will lose your pension. That's what we have to start to do.
Mr. Liu.
Thank you. I also believe that greater disclosures have to be made, especially with regard to the budget process. And I'm very proud as controller, I have brought an unprecedented level of transparency to the budgeting process. When we talk about participatory democracy, I've done that just this past month with regard to my People's Budget, NYC.com, where we had over 10,000 votes cast on various items of the city's budget. I also believe in stronger campaign finance rules. And, you know, look, you're getting this from somebody who is now the most thoroughly investigated candidate in the history of New York City, all right? After 4 years of the federal government looking into my campaign fundraising, reviewing 1 million documents, interrogating thousands of my supporters, and wiretapping my phones, including my cell phones, for 18 months, which I've told is I must have done something really, really terrible, because even mob bosses and drug kingpins get their phones tapped for a couple of months at a time. After all this, the only thing that anybody can stand up and say is make baseless and scurrilous accusations about me have known about campaign finance violations. I believe that my campaign may not have been perfect, but I think that if any other campaign in this city or anywhere had been put through the same level of scrutiny that my campaign has been put through these past few years, I have every expectation that we would be head and shoulders above every other campaign. We're running this campaign. I'm proud of the fact that I've engaged communities that never have been engaged in the political process before, and we're going to continue to do so.
Thank you. So next question, we're going to start with Mr. Albanese. What do you see as emerging growth industries? What would you do to nurture and cultivate them in the city? And what's your view on using tax incentives for those goals?
I think that the technology and engineering area is become a real growth area for the city. The Roosevelt Island project with Cornell is, I think, going to result in an expansion of the city's technology and engineering business. I was at the pier just a couple of weeks ago, visited a tech meetup, and there are literally thousands of small companies that are startups in the city of New York, and this will diversify our economy. The finance industry is shrinking, as we all know, and we have to make sure that we nurture the technology area because they do create living wage jobs, which we need desperately in the city. I want to provide incentives for these companies by training. I want to pay for the training through our community colleges for people to be trained in that area. For example, computer coding. That's an area that really there's a demand for. There are thousands of jobs out there, according to the people in the arena who tell me that they need folks. So I would say, as an incentive, I would provide the training, and the companies would pledge to hire folks in that industry. But there'd have to be specific jobs that would have to come out of that, and I would provide tax breaks, and if they don't comply with the rules, we would penalize them. Because one of the things we've done in the city is developers and companies receive tax breaks, and then they don't keep their word, and there's no clawback provision. So we have to make sure that the penalties are very strong if we provide tax breaks.
Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, I think that if you look at growth areas in the city of New York in the future, and I will, I've been critical of the mayor. Let me give him credit for the focus on the applied sciences and growing the Cornell Initiative in Roosevelt Island, in trying to make New York City the high-tech capital of the world. And I think that's an excellent direction that we're moving in there. I think that, you look at, obviously, and everybody will always talk about biotech. That is another area. Health is another growth area in the city of New York. But I also believe that, small businesses and continue to be a growth area in the city of New York across all 5 boroughs. And the thing that the city of New York continues to do is to squeeze those small businesses each and every day. You continue to hear ridiculous story after ridiculous story of how that small business was fined, how it was inspected, and problems created. New York City is using our small businesses as revenue generation. It's no longer about enforcement or about safety. It's about revenue generation. It needs to stop. It needs to stop. Other areas and other focus, I believe that we should be growing minority and women-owned businesses in the city of New York. If you look at the state is attempting to do 20% of its business with minority and women-owned businesses. New York City, the number sits at 3%. It is outrageous. So we need to create real focus. If the state of New York can do 20% in that area, New York City can do better than that. And I would start at the top, and it is a focus for me. And last but not least, I'm not against tax breaks for jobs, but I am tired of being taken advantage of. I am tired of people promising jobs and then and then walking away from those commitments. If you make a commitment and you agree to create jobs, you'll either do it or we will sue you and get money back from you.
And I know you have to leave, Mr. Liu, but if you can give us one last response.
Yeah, sure. I think that there are a number of growth sectors in the city. I think high tech is clearly one of them, and it's done so on its own, and not necessarily with any help from the city. If anything, the city's probably made it more difficult for some of these high tech entrepreneurs to set up shop in New York City, and people are still doing so. It's also about nurturing this growing growth sector in our economy, but it's also about stepping back and viewing what our city has been. We always pride ourselves on the fact that we are the global capital of the world, and yet we do so little to take advantage of the fact. When we talk about growing high tech, the thought is that we're competing against California. No, we're not competing against California. We're competing against Seoul. We're competing against London. We're competing against other global cities, and we have to start thinking that way. We also have tremendous assets in the people of New York City that completely get overlooked time and time again. You look at the neighborhoods of Queens, where each enclave has strong ties to economies all across the world. And yet we don't do anything about nurturing those relationships. In Queens was the borough most resistant and resilient in this terrible recession that we're still trying to climb out of, primarily because of the global relationships that those communities have. We should be taking advantage of New York City as the capital of the world, instead of continuing to silo ourselves, thinking that we got to do this or we got to do that, we got to incentivize this company, we got to subsidize that corporations. I say, let's get rid of all the subsidies, because there's no demonstrable evidence that those subsidies have actually created jobs en masse. Most jobs in New York City are created with no subsidies whatsoever. So let's let everybody have a level playing field. Start everybody, whether they be large corporations or small businesses and entrepreneurs, give everybody the same tax break or give nobody the tax break. And let's level the playing field so that everybody can compete fairly and equitably.
Thank you. Mr. de Blasio.
Thank you, Errol. I gave a speech last week at the new school, and the point of it was to say that the economy of this city is simply not functioning for a huge percentage of our people at this point. The middle class in the city is not just shrinking, it is in danger of disappearing in the near future. recent report from the Bloomberg administration, 46% of New Yorkers were at 150% of the poverty level or below, meaning at or near the poverty level, almost half our people. Which means the approach to subsidy and the approach to economic development has failed to reinforce the middle class. I agree with the core concept John put forward, and the subsidies to individual businesses because the track record has been so poor. Instead of subsidizing businesses, we need to subsidize and support sectors where we can actually see substantial job creation for New York City residents that lead them toward the middle class. Now, one example, Fresh Direct, a business subsidy, $130 million, so those trucks can block our streets all the time, $130 million because they threatened to leave New York City when I don't think there was any proof they actually would. Instead, I would have liked to have taken that $130 million. I would take that $130 million, put it into two areas. One, CUNY, because CUNY could right away start to prepare young people and folks who are out of work for jobs in the tech sector and the healthcare sector that require real specific skills and certification, but that CUNY doesn't either have the programs for or people cannot afford to get to. We could be subsidizing tuition assistance and program development so New Yorkers could get those jobs. The same with healthcare. And I'd also like to see more support for small business by access of credit from the city, because the small business sector is vibrant in every neighborhood and every borough and creates local jobs. If we don't do this, I'll finish with this point, if we don't do this, we will continue to see a huge number of jobs in the tech sector and in healthcare not be filled by New York City residents because there aren't enough qualified New Yorkers, yet we have a huge unemployment rate, much higher than the national average. And so those jobs have to be filled by folks from out of city, even out of country. I don't begrudge them their opportunity. I want to see more and more New Yorkers have a chance to actually make it to the middle class in this town, and city policy should be supporting that.
Thank you. You know, I'm going to go to closing statements. I thought about maybe trying to sneak in one more, but rather than having folks trickle out, we'll do closing statements, 90 seconds, please, gentlemen, in the following order. Mr. Albanese first, Mr. Liu second, Mr. Thompson third, and then Mr. de Blasio.
Well, thank you for hosting this event, and thank all of you for coming out. I'm the only person in this race who's not a career politician, who's not accepting money from lobbyists and developers, and I'm committed to putting the people in charge of City Hall. Let me tell you a bit about my background. I came here as an immigrant at the age of 8. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Brooklyn where my mother raises on a garment worker's salary. The public schools, the libraries, the sports programs, the CUNY system all helped to elevate my family from the working class to the middle class. I'm running for mayor because I want to do the same for future generations of New Yorkers, and I think the political system is letting them slip away. I spent 11 years as a public school teacher. I spent 15 years as a city council member with a record of reform. I authored the city's first living wage law, which provided for 70,000 workers with $3 billion in their pockets, and I've spent the last 15 years in the private sector. We have a lot of work to do to make this city more affordable. We have to address income inequality and poverty, and we have to create jobs that actually pay the bills. In order to do that, we need a political system that works for its citizens. Right now, we have an out-of-touch political class that spends more time at cocktail parties than they do listening to their constituents. My opponents are part of the problem. They don't offer many solutions. They play it safe, and if elected, they'll be indebted to every lobbyist in town. I want to be a different kind of mayor. I want to tell the truth, even if it's politically risky. I want to make decisions on the merits. I want to give regular people a voice in City Hall. And with your help and with your votes, we can build a better New York. Thank you for having me tonight.
Well, thank you very much for this great opportunity to talk about the future of New York City, although we had to do it in 90-second sound bites. But such is the nature of valuable time, and I can only imagine how many hours have been billed, or the value of those hours that could have been billed in this room. This is like $1 million forum here. I have had the privilege of serving as city comptroller now for coming up on 4 years, and in this capacity, I've looked at through my audits and contract review, my investment record, and the bond underwriting we've undertaken to save billions of dollars. I've looked at every aspect of city government, and I do believe that this prepares me well to cross the street from the municipal building to City Hall to be the next mayor of New York City. My background is not in politics. I've been in politics now for 11 and a half years, 8 years in the city council, and almost 4 years now as controller. But most of my career has been in the private sector, professionally as an actuary and categorically as a management consultant. My last job being at a firm called PricewaterhouseCoopers, not very far from where we're sitting here today. My training, I've got a degree in mathematical physics, and really growing up here as an immigrant, I never ever imagined that I would ever run for office, or even someone like me could run for office. So it is an incredible privilege to have served in public office for 11 years now, and to be here for you to consider it as someone who would like to be the next mayor of New York City. Although actually, I think the only thing that I had in my political background was when we first immigrated here, my dad wanted me and my brothers to have American names, so he renamed me after JFK. And he took on Joseph as JFK's dad's name. And you can only imagine my two brothers, Robert and Edward. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Thank you.
Yes.
Again, let me thank our organizers for bringing us together this evening, and ERROL, let me thank you for hosting or moderating probably about your 50th venue these days. You're spending a lot of time with us. So it is, when you look at my family, the Thompson family, my grandparents came here in 1917 from the Caribbean, moved to Harlem and then later to Brooklyn in 1939. My parents, my mother was a New York City public school teacher for almost 30 years. My dad, and there's some of you in this room who know my father, he is still going strong at 88 years old. Former city councilman, state senator, 88, let me tell you, and he's trying to pass himself off as my brother these days. Do not believe him, okay? But, my dad, as a former judge and a public servant also, I'm a graduate of New York City's public schools. I've had great opportunity in my life, the opportunity to serve the people of this city as a public servant in so many ways. Special assistant and chief of staff to a congressman, deputy borough president in Brooklyn, member of the Board of Education, president of the Board of Education for 5 years, controller of the City of New York City's second highest citywide elected official for 8 years. I'm looking forward to being the mayor of the City of New York. The challenges that face us are numerous. 2013 is New York City at a crossroads. And the question is, what type of city are we going to be? Are we going to be a city for the wealthy, or are we going to be a city that helps to move people out of poverty and into the working class, and working class New Yorkers into the middle class? That's what this year is about. What New York City will be, what direction we're going to go in. I want to be the mayor to be able to move this city in a direction for all New Yorkers in all 5 boroughs. And I believe I have the background to be able to do that and represent everyone in the city of New York. And again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
ERROL, you'll forgive me if I go in a different direction here by way of closing statement. I don't want to do a biographical statement. I want to do something that's a little more sober at this moment. Today we've seen some revelations of government surveillance of communications on a level we didn't know existed. We saw the recent controversy over the Associated Press. We're in a time where civil liberties are once again under real threat. I'm sorry to say some of that is coming from an administration I deeply respect and appreciate, but that doesn't make it any more acceptable. But I say that to an audience full of people who care deeply about the rule of law and about the Constitution and civil liberties, because again, here in New York City, the question today regards our police force. And the trial happening before us talks so fundamentally about the future of this city. In 2013, we decide what kind of policing we will have in the future. We decide whether we're actually going to respect civil liberties again and recognize that constitutional rights are not negotiable. They are foundational, and that we have to achieve public safety while respecting those rights and reinforcing them. You're going to hear real differences between the candidates on this. I respect all my colleagues, I really do. I disagree with Bill Thompson, who does not want an independent inspector general or a racial profiling bill. Disagree with John Liu on inspector general. I particularly disagree with Christine Quinn. I'm sorry she's not here as part of this, but I think she shows the greatest inconsistency by wanting to keep Ray Kelly as police commissioner. He is the architect of the overuse of stop and frisk, and he's not going to turn it around. So let's be clear, you can't keep him as police commissioner to be serious about making those changes, and simultaneously she opposes a racial profiling bill. We have to get it right, and this election is the opportunity to do it. We saw last year in this country sudden step forward on immigration reform through the electoral process. It's time to make a big step forward through the electoral process on reforming the relationship between police and community and getting the NYPD to respect and follow through on constitutional rights every single day in this city and end racial profiling, and that's what I'm committed to doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking the candidates for spending some time with us tonight. And a big thank you to all of the bar associations who made tonight possible.
So are we seeing you tomorrow?
I hope not. I haven't checked the schedule yet.